This is going to be the Peter and Susanna Trostle Farm, Part 1 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Now, Peter Trostle was born in the year 1788, so he was an elderly man during the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. His farm sat on the southern side of the York Pike, which today is Route 30, and that runs right along here, Route 30, the sheets for Gettysburg. This is actually Route 15, Highway 15, where it intersects with 30 today was actually the Peter Trostle Farm. Now, at the end of the first day's fighting of Barlow's Knoll, troops from Georgia under John B. Gordon marched toward the York Pike, along with Tanner's Battery. Now, it was Tanner's Battery that we talked about in an earlier video. They have their battery today up near where the Gettysburg High School is, on what we call Confederate Lost Avenue. Then the 33rd Virginia skirmished with the enemy while guarding the Confederate left. Also, the 4th Virginia under William Extra Billy Smith were here on this farm. These guys were on the extreme Confederate left, and on July 2nd they would move forward in this direction over toward the Daniel Lady Farm. When they did, they burned down the Peter and Susanna Trostle Farm. This house that sits here today was built the following year in 1864. However, the original foundation of the house is still here, and it was built over the original foundation of the original Peter Trostle Farm, as was the barn up here. The barn was built on the original embankment that it sits on today. So even though these are from 1864, they are of historical nature because of their foundations. Also, this is a very little known fact and action here at the Battle of Gettysburg. Today there's a tin spring house that was built in the 1940s. However, the original spring sat here on the foundation and today is covered by this rock. And that provided water to the Peter and Susanna Trostle Farm. Now, just after the Battle of Gettysburg, on September the 11th, 1863, Peter Trostle, as an elderly man, died here in Gettysburg. So it is quite ironic that he was an old man whose house was taken over, burned down by the Confederates on July 2nd, 1863. And maybe because of his age and some of the anguish that he had to go through losing his home, it caused him health problems, and he did die on September the 11th, 1863. I'm working very hard on this video series as an in-depth story that's very rarely talked about, and I'm working very hard to get you guys inside of this historic house, and that's probably going to be on my Part 2 video. Part 3, we're going to take a look at the barn, and then Part 4, we're going to look at this very large oak tree, which today I've actually done a video on. It's next to the sheets and right behind the subway. In 1863, that oak was part of the Peter Trostle Farm. It is a witness tree. It goes back to 1728, and we're going to call that tree the Trostle Witness Tree. So again, this video series is going to be on the Peter and Susanna Trostle Farm, and this has been Part 1 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. This is going to be the Peter and Susanna Trostle Farm Part 2 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook, and we're actually inside the house on the 2nd floor now. I'm looking at the sheets back here on Route 30 that we talked about in Part 1. Again, this is the inside of the rebuilt 1864 house that was built on the original foundation after the original house was burned by Confederates on July 2nd, 1863. One of only 3 farms to be burned during the Battle of Gettysburg. So even though the house was built in 1864, the foundation of the house is still original. Also, it is on the same foundation, so it has the same look looking out from the house that the pre-Civil War house would have had. And of course, here is the large bank barn here out in the western part of the yard. This is an opportunity for everyone at Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook to take a sneak peek rather, of the inside of this house, which would be nearly impossible other than going through the owner. And I've been given special permission to do this and give you guys this special tour inside the house. So again, I want to give some thanks out. And as you can see, these are all the original wide floorboards that were put in 1864. And then there were some alterations done in the 1920s and 30s with the heating system in the house. Currently, the house is empty. It's up for rent, up for sale. And again, you can see the Wyndham Hotel on Route 15 here on the east side of the house. And then, of course, the south side of the house in the distance, you can see the round tops. So this house and this farm where Peter and Susanna Trostle lived afforded an excellent view of the surrounding areas of Gettysburg. One thing I do want to mention, and we're going to look at it in a later part, this tree that sits right out here is a monster tree. See if I can get a better look at it. Yes, it's right over here with the big wide branches. This tree sits behind the subway today, and it was here on the Peter and Susanna Trostle farm that tree, which dates back to 1728. It's one of the oldest trees in Gettysburg, and we're going to talk about that in a later part here. We're going to move down to the first floor, down the staircase, into what would have been the parlor in 1864 here. Original fireplace. This is being painted. This would have been a bedroom. It also has a blocked off fireplace here. And then the kitchen today. Probably in 1864 there would have been a summer kitchen behind the house. Today there is an addition on the back of the house where the summer kitchen might have sat. This is the back wall of the original 1864 house. So again, this has been the Peter and Susanna Trostle Farm Part 2 on the Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Farm Part 3 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. In Part 2 we actually went inside for a very rare look inside the Peter and Susanna Trostle Farm. Part 1, we talked about its place during the Battle of Gettysburg. And here on Part 3, we're going to look at the barn. Now, of course, the barn is not the original barn, because as we talked about in Part 1, the original barn was burnt along with the house by Confederate soldiers on July 2nd, 1863. This barn was also, like the house, built on the original foundation with the original dirt bank in 1864. So the barn goes back to 1864, and apparently it has went under 2 more revisions to the barn, one being the foundation in the 1920s. But it is a good example of a late 1800s Pennsylvania bank barn. And of course, with most private properties, you do not have the right to go in and around them. We do have the owner's permission to do this special video series. And actually this barn here, for anyone interested, is for rent. And it has its original floorboards from what I've been told. In Part 4 we're going to look at some of the areas of the farm, and more specifically the old oak tree, which dates back to 1728. And from the bank barn here in the distance, you can see this mammoth of a tree that was one time a part of the Peter Trostle farm. And we're going to give a very in-depth description of that tree close up in Part 4. And as we walk down the bank of the barn, you can see the size of that tree in comparison to other trees. Again, this is the Peter and Susanna Trostle Farm, Part 3 on Gettysburg Battlefield. This is going to be the Peter and Susanna Trostle Farm, Part 4 here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. And we're going to take a look at this enormous 280-plus-year-old oak tree that sits here on what used to be the Peter and Susanna Trostle Farm. And today, Route 30 is right here. There's the sheets, and the store that the tree sits behind is the subway here on Route 30, Ruby Tuesday here in the distance. And many people drive right by here going into Gettysburg and never notice this massive tree. About 15 years ago when the shopping center was built, this tree was in danger of being cut down, and at the last minute some town supervisors were able to save the tree and alter the building so that it would not destroy the tree. This tree is about 17 feet in diameter. It is a white oak. It's 286 years old, and this tree began growing in the year of 1728. Now, this tree is not only a witness to the Battle of Gettysburg, but it's also was here during the American Revolution. This tree was here when Gettysburg, before it was Gettysburg, was called Gettysstown, and before it was Gettysstown, it was called the Marsh Creek Settlement. This tree has been here since the Marsh Creek Settlement. This tree at that time was a part of Lancaster County. Later it was York County, and then finally Adams County in the year 1800. During the Revolutionary War, this tree actually overlooked the York Pike, going to York, Pennsylvania in that direction, and it was only 30 or 40 miles away from here in 1776 when the Liberty Bell, being hidden from the British Army, was housed in York. Now, as to this tree's lifespan here, one of the reasons is the thicket of grass that grows around the tree. When this tree drops its leaves, they fall onto the ground, and because of the thickness and the thicket of stickers and weeds and brush, these leaves stay in the ground and feed natural nutrients to this tree. And that is one of the reasons that this tree has lived so long. And again, as you can see, the shopping center comes up straight this way and then all of a sudden bends. The reason for that bend was when the shopping center was being built, it was originally supposed to come up here and right through this tree. And the town commissioners were able to save the tree by having the developer alter their plans. And of course, just a few years ago, the tree developed a large split in it. Right here, you can see the split in the tree. It goes all the way up. And it was going to split in half, and because of the weight and size of these branches, one windstorm would have cracked this tree right in half and killed it. What ended up happening was a local town supervisor and a tree company volunteered their time to save the tree by inserting large steel dowels in the side of this tree and right through it in 3 different spots, literally putting it back in place. It will now grow over the rods, heal itself, and this tree is very likely to live another 100 years or so. So that is definitely a work to be commended. It's one of a few witness trees that were here during the Battle of Gettysburg, probably the oldest one. Another one sits just down here a ways, but of course this one is the oldest, again growing in the year 1728, and it was originally a part of the Peter and Susanna Trostle farm, which sits right over here in the distance, which we took a look at in parts 1, 2 inside the house, 3 the barn, and now here 4. We're going to have one more video in this series where we're actually going to walk from this tree and we're going to go over to the top of what we call Trostle Hill, which sits behind the sheets, and then just here to the western side of current day Route 15. And many people riding up and down 15 and also east to west on 30 miss the Peter Trostle farm and this mammoth 17.5 foot in diameter oak tree that sits here behind the Subway Shopping Center. Again, this has been the Peter and Susanna Trostle farm, the witness tree, the white oak, the famous white oak. This is part 4 on Gettysburg Battlefield. This is going to be part 5, our final part on the Peter and Susanna Trostle farm. And I am standing just north of the house at the top of the Trostle Hill. Route 15 today and the Wyndham Hotel run this way northbound. Through the woods here you can see the sheets, and then over here is the subway, and you can see the mammoth oak tree that we did in our last part, part 4. And I'm now standing on Trostle's Hill, and the ground in front of us looks almost identical to the way it did in 1863. The hill sat here just on the north side of the house and gave it an excellent view of the surrounding area. We can see the round tops out here in the distance. I can see the water tower where Camp Letterman was, and today is the giant shopping center. And then just left to the water tower where this tree is, I can actually see the tower at the top of Culp's Hill. So again, the Peter and Susanna Trostle Hill gets almost no mention in the annals of the Battle of Gettysburg, and thus the reason today that I was able to unlock some of this unknown history and present it to you. Also giving you a special tour, as I promised, in part 2 inside the rebuilt Trostle house from 1864. Again, the Trostle farm was a scene of tragedy. It was one of 3 homesteads that were burned in Gettysburg, one being the Emanuel Harmon farm, the William Bliss farm, and the Peter and Susanna Trostle farm. So those 3 families suffered quite a bit here in July of 1863. There have been books written on the Battle of the Bliss farm, and there's interpretations of the Emanuel Harmon farm, but you barely ever hear about the Peter and Susanna Trostle farm. Of course, today development has torn into it. As you can see, the sheets here, the Subway shopping center and Burger King, and then just over the hill would be our Walmart. Yet this farm still is tucked back here, hidden from most people. Most people that ride by Route 30 here into Gettysburg go by and never even know that this farm's back here. So hopefully this video series, this 5-part video series, which I've done here on the Peter and Susanna Trostle farm, has helped unlock some of the mystery surrounding it and a little bit of an unknown part of the Battle of Gettysburg. Again, in recap, this farm sat here on the southern side of the York Pike. The house and contents were set on fire by Confederates on July 2nd of 1863, and Peter Trostle would die that year on September the 11th, 1863. This has been the Peter and Susanna Trostle Farm, Part 5, here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook.